You're having a great evening so far, afternoon, depending where you're joining us from. I'll allow a couple seconds for everyone to get settled. I know some people will join the meeting as we continue. You'll notice that when you join the call, you're muted. That's just because there's several people on today's call. Hopefully there'll be some time at the end for Q&A, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation or want to make any comments, you can leave that in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on the chat, making sure that everything is answered. This session is also being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording tomorrow on the same page that you registered on. All of our recordings from our previous sessions are also available there for you to view if you missed any of them. All right, I'll briefly introduce our speaker. We're really happy to have someone from our own community, from our Thrive community, from Wheaton Montessori. We're joined by Jennifer Rogers, and she's going to be talking about sensitive periods. This might be a term you may have heard of in the Montessori space, and it's one that's very important. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her so she can share her presentation. And as I mentioned, we might have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to hold on to those. All right, Jennifer.
Thank you. So, and thanks to all of you for showing up. I appreciate it. I was, whenever I sit down to do this, I think about what I've learned, and somebody who taught for just a few years would say the same thing. I think that we tend to have our very best parents who are already doing a fantastic job show up. And so we're grateful for your presence, but also because we know that you go back and do good things with your kids with the knowledge that you gather. So I'm aware, I love this format. I haven't participated before, but I love that those of you who are home with young children can be present for events like this without having to arrange childcare and get out of work early and get dressed and all of that. But I'm also aware that some of you have to multitask while you're listening. So I'm going to try to make every bit of information useful to you, but also say my thank yous first, and also give you a brief overview so that those of you who have to dodge off to put somebody to bed or finish your day will come away with something good that you can use for the rest of your week. I would summarize in brief the two big points that are obvious but you can dive deeper are to pay attention and to show up. And obviously all of you are already doing that. You show up and you pay attention. I would, if I was being preachy, add a bit about staying off screens and phones when we're with our children and giving them our undivided attention. But since I'm sitting here staring at you on a screen, and a few minutes ago I had headphones on, that probably wouldn't be, I would look a little silly. But whenever I talk to other teachers about this topic, they always say, make sure to turn your phones off and turn the TV off and just pay attention. I wanted to say too, before I go into the topic, this school year has had a very strange start for me, unusual for me. My classroom started full for the first time since COVID, which is refreshing, but that's the first time I've done that in 4 years. And unfortunately, the assistant I've worked with for many years, who is a gifted teacher and also a wonderful human being, broke her ankle. And what we hoped would be a quick recovery took a long time. And so I had the good fortune to one of my co-teachers, one of her oldest children just graduated from college. She grew up in the school, and Montessori is not her career path, but she was available. And so I've been working with somebody who is a peer of my son and grew up in our school. And that has been a gift. But I wanted to mention it at the beginning because I feel like having somebody with me who grew up in Montessori, and I watched her grow up. I still feel like I'm growing up in Montessori, but also she's you'll notice some of the graphs and stuff that I have in my PowerPoint. Her name is on the bottom, and I wanted her to do that because she turned over her life for a couple months, and the graphics were an extra gift. So Alita Burrick is a thank you from the very beginning. I'm sitting in the classroom where I spend my days with Lily and I and our 30 favorite kids. And the pictures that you'll see in the PowerPoint are children, mostly children from our school, some from a long time ago, some from recently, and some of them are pictures of my kids who are young adults, now all grown up and no longer here, but they did grow up in the school. The other thing I wanted to mention by way of introduction to this topic is many of you people who have been around Montessori for years probably recognize the name Hila Patel. She passed away a year ago, but I think her children were in Montessori in the 50s, and then she worked in many different capacities in London for many years. And after her retirement, she just kept right on working until her health failed. She passed away a year ago, and so I have been reading about her lately, and she was the examiner in 1995 when I graduated from primary training. She came to give us our oral and written exams, but also spoke at our graduation. And all of us know who go to graduation. Usually when the speaker stands up, you kind of sigh and hope that it won't last too long. She stood up and said just a few words. I'm paraphrasing because I wasn't taking notes, but the gist of what she said was, please remember as you go out into your world as teachers and as parents that patience is not a virtue. Knowledge that comes from observation is what will give you the gift of patience. And that was all she said. And I'm so thankful for that, because had she said more, I might not have remembered. Everybody who remembers her in the memorials that have been written in the past year remembers her as a person of grace and strength and real dignity. That's also my memory. But I'm so glad that she had so little to say that day, because I've never remembered it so often, and wanted to offer that to you today, because I think the gift of presentations like this, and the other things that Thrive offers, is that it gives teachers and parents an opportunity to go into your work with children with knowledge. And I think that knowledge and understanding helps us to be patient. And at times when we feel like we're completely out of patience, and to understand things that are, for those of us, well, I spend my day with kids, but for those of you who spend your days in other fields, it's sometimes hard to figure out what's going on with kids. So, we also included some quotes on some of these slides that are related, but I'm not going to read them to you because you can all read, and pictures of kids doing some of the things that relate to the sensitive periods that we're talking about. So then I would like to introduce you to the sensitive periods as a concept first, and include this graph. This is one of the things that Aaliyah made for me. Sensitive periods, I think, are some of the most helpful knowledge, not complicated, not hard to remember, but some of the most helpful knowledge about early childhood development for practical application, and something that I think about every day, especially in the classroom, but even at home in my life with my family, because they indicate the course that a child's life will take and how their fascinations will come and go. The other thing that's most interesting to me about this is that the topic of sensitive periods is that even though Montessori and anybody else who worked in early childhood, study of early childhood, would agree that healthy children and infants come into the world with all of these things, wherever they're born and whatever their circumstances are, they have these things in common. Their attractions are consistent, but because their environments are different and our families are different and we speak different languages and we grow up in different climates and different cultures, it looks so different as children grow up. And that's one of the several reasons I love the topic, because it's really interesting to see how many things we have in common, but how different it can look around the world. My opinion, I think, about the sensitive periods is that when even if I don't think it's important to memorize or to remember. We did have to do that as teachers in training, memorize the ages and when they applied in people's lives. I don't think it's really important to have the details committed to memory. It's important to have the concepts memorized and to be able to walk into a room and recognize small things, because those, I think, then when the moments of joy happen, you're aware and attuned and can participate in the lives of your children. So I think the only other thing about that I wanted to add is that Montessori Moments, which was in the title and one of the goals of the presentation, looks so different for kids. So for most of us who work in a profession where it's competitive or There's many different types of goals that we're working towards. We would think of a moment, a special moment, as being a goal attained or an accomplishment or an achievement or a moment of celebration of some type. But Montessori moments for kids look entirely different. So they're quiet and peaceful, and what they look like is a young person being completely and deeply absorbed in an activity. The activity is kind of irrelevant. The affect and the way that children look when they're absorbed and responding to a sensitive period looks unique and different from what would be a similar type of experience from an adult. What I would compare it to in the life of adult is for what artists and people who have achieved great things in their field of choice often refer to it as flow when they're, so like if a musician got to their million hours of practice in a particular piece of music and could play without thinking anymore and completely unaware of their audience, they would call that flow. And although the term might seem strangely applied to children, that does happen with children. The thing that they're doing isn't a violin necessarily or anything that would be impressive in a group audience, but they do achieve that state of flow where all of their senses and all of their attention is focused on one thing for a long, sometimes a very long period of time. The first of the sensitive periods for the first plane of development, the age that I work with, 3 to 6, is language. This is the longest and strongest, and of course it goes on throughout our lives, but it's most attuned with very young children. So you see with from an infant who's born with nothing except a cry, although even if you can remember back to when your babies were born, babies have different cries. So moms can usually tell when a baby is crying if the cry means I'm hungry or I'm wet or I need you or I'm scared, because they sound different. So even our youngest human beings can communicate pretty effectively, but then there's syllables and sound formation. And depending on where the child is born, they begin to acquire language very quickly. Until when they get to my class, many of the kids, not all, but many of the kids have pretty rich and expansive vocabularies, and we start working right away on the gifts of conversation and oral communication and singular sound repetition and phonics, beginning reading skills. I think language, the sensitive period for language is what drew me to Montessori, and still one of the things that I enjoy most about the young children. Such a lot of fun for them. This is one we see last year during the first reading. That never gets old. Order. So this goes from 6 months to 5 years, and one of the things about this order that is maybe not immediately apparent, but Montessori teachers work very hard on this, is that each of the materials in our classroom has a particular place, and there's a sequence that's apparent on the shelf. So much of the way the kids can successfully organize their day and function independently is because within a day or two, they understand where the materials that they can do right now are and where the flow is, the left to right flow is. The idea of beginning, middle, end, taking an activity, repeating it, and then return it to the same place is learned. And to some kids it comes naturally, but to others it's a little bit more of a challenge. But for those of us who are working with young kids, we understand that organization contributes to the organization of their mind and gives them access to the intelligence that they have within them. This sensitive period, I think, is the hardest for adult parents who are not by nature neat and tidy, because you're not in that sensitive period anymore. And many of you, people are very different in their life choices in terms of how they build their home and how much they care about if everything has a place. But I still bring it up, even at the risk in conferences, at the risk of worrying people, because it's worth the effort, even if it's just for that period of time, because it's not the preparation of the environment is important, but what's really important, I feel like, is that it's a basic community ethic. It's the kids' first opportunity to think about things like we clean things because when the next person wants to do it, we want them to pick it up clean. And we put it back in the shelf in this place because the next person who wants to use polishing wants to know exactly where it is. This comes up, of course, often in your family as well. When you brush your teeth, you put the toothpaste back where it belongs so that when the next person brushes their teeth, they know where it is. And I'm sure from your family, because we all have imperfect families, that sometimes people don't do that. And, you know, the hairbrush is not where it's supposed to be, or somebody put something in the refrigerator it's not supposed to, and it's really annoying. So I love about that sequence in the classroom. Not only does it help them develop their intelligence, but it also gives them their first practice of considering the needs of the other people that they share space with, whether it's at school or at home. I included this picture, which is not really on topic at all, but because those are my koi from my house. And so since there was a fish in my coat, I put the koi in there as well. We dug that pond. Noticing small details. Those of you who have or can remember when your kids were little, you knew this was happening, the fascination with small details, when you set out for a walk to the park or to the zoo or something like that, and you didn't make it out of your driveway because there was a tiny little ant or a bug or some tiny little stone. It was totally fascinating. And I feel like the way that we recognize it is the toddler squat, where it looks like a yoga move, where they get down low and get their noses really close to the pavement so that they can see exactly what's happening. From 2 to 3.5, the kids are just fascinated with the tiniest of details. And so in our classroom preparation, we have a material that I love called the language materials, which are a vocabulary builder, and then later a reading material. And we have to be super careful when we pick the objects to be identified. It has to be, if it's a collection of birds, it has to be just a bird, not a bird in a tree with a worm, because if you're doing that with a 2-year-old, they'll get fixed on the worm, or the bird, the tiny little color of the leaf. It is to be an object in isolation, without other details that might distract. My classroom, you can't really see from where I am, but in the daylight, I'm on a corner and there's windows all around, and we have the gift of sunlight throughout the day. And so on one angle, you can see the garbage truck back up and lift the dumpster, which is super exciting. We have bees out the side, the hives that our adolescents care for, so we can watch the bees or we can watch them working with the bees. There's a construction site where they're building a big gas station. There's a lot of construction built. All these things are super interesting to the little people that I work with, but nothing is more interesting than the spider on the floor. The whole classroom will shut down to examine the movement of a tiny little creature. Running for his life across the floor of our classroom, or when ladybug flies in. That's just absolutely more fascinating even than the garbage truck. Do this the next thing. I love this picture. These are kids on the playground staring at something. Refinement of the senses. So primary classrooms, most of our young people come in already with attuned vision, hearing, taste. So they've done all of those things plenty in their years of life. So the materials that we have in the classroom are to refine and perfect. So they have built-in controls of error, but what this little guy is doing is building his visual discrimination. And he's delighted with his project this far, even though you're adult, I can see that it's not in the right order. He's practicing. When we do the colors, we play color games where they can search out things that correspond with the color in the classroom. Most of the kids already know red, green, yellow, and blue. Sometimes I teach colors, but many kids already know that the work is not naming, it's associating and noticing degrees of difference between the many different shades of green we have in the world. Touch and texture, we do a lot of work with auditory sensitivity, helping the kids to differentiate volume and different types of sound. And strangely enough, when we practice that ear sensitivity is when we notice the most silence in the classroom. When their attention is turned toward their ear, the volume goes way down because everybody's focus is on a single sound in isolation. So it's fascinating thing. Coordination of movement also 2.5 to 4.5 years. You notice when your children are very little, their bodies are out of proportion. So they're top heavy. Their heads are bigger than the bottom half of their body. So they tend to do more running than walking, and they tend to do a lot of bumping into things and falling down. Thankfully, they're close to the ground, so most of the time they don't get hurt. But as in these years, one of the gifts that we can give them in this classroom is the opportunity, again, to refine and perfect. So I'm a great lover of yoga, and some of the kids in my class do a lot of yoga. Most of primary classrooms have an ellipse. This is my coworker, Ms. Carr's classroom. What the kids are doing is practicing coordinating their bodies so that their feet stay on the same line, same point of focus, like a gymnast would do on balancing. To an adult walking into a classroom with an ellipse, it might not seem like a challenge at all. But when you watch a group of young people effortfully trying to keep their attention trained on the ellipse, it is quite difficult for them. And fun. We also, of course, one of the the movements that's hardest now, and increasingly hard, I think, for young people in our world, is the fine motor. So the gross motor would be like on the ellipse or yoga or something like that. Fine motor for people who've grown up in a world where most of the stuff that we do is mechanized. So we don't need to wash our dishes anymore or do our laundry. And some people have gardens, but many don't. So it's hard for them to develop strength of hand. And we work really hard on it at school, trying to get a pincer grip. Our large chalkboards help, small chalkboards help, but it's a project. And for many of the kids, it remains hard throughout their times in the primary classroom and on into elementary and older. Most all of the kids that we work with will use computers. We know that, but that strength of hand is so important for them, especially for the strength of their mind. So we persist and find that there's great joy in that achievement. So fine motor, strength of fine motor skills, and the associated arm movement. So when you watch young children making their first attempts at shape or letter forms, there's partly the pincer, but also the confining their arm to a limited space. So that could be on a chalkboard, but when they sit down, it's really tough for them to keep this part of their arm, especially elbow to hand, on flat on the table. And they have to do all kinds of wiggling with their bodies and all kinds of breaks just to build the coordination and strength necessary to do that. Grace and courtesy. I think this is one of the hallmarks of Montessori education. When our kids go out into the world, this is how people recognize them, as their practice with grace and courtesy. This little girl is in my class. This is on the when she was younger. I think it's the 2.5 or 3-year-old, and then on the right, she's the oldest kid in my class this year. And her mom grows flowers in her big, beautiful yard. So one of the grace and courtesy joys on the teaching end has been, Mrs. Rogers, I'm here with some flowers for you today, for our classroom, not just for me. Kids love that practice of saying hello or goodbye, or excuse me, or can you help me, or please wait. At this time of the year, we're getting ready to practice blowing our nose because allergies have kicked in for people who have them, and then the cold and flu season will start. And although a lesson on blowing your nose would be embarrassing in adults, the kids are riveted. They really appreciate the opportunity to know how to do that and not to have somebody grab their nose and take care of it for them. Already, I'm sending kids to look in the mirror, and they're all into it. They want it to be just right when you're done. I also noticed the privileges at the place where I work is that I work a very short drive from a hospital, our community hospital. And many of the children in my class through the years have been the sons and daughters of physicians. And I notice about many of those kids that they already know how to call somebody by their name. So when they say good morning, they say, good morning, Mrs. Rogers, how are you today? And when they ask me for help, they say, Mrs. Rogers, may I have help? And when we give that lesson, we encourage the kids to call people by their name and to make eye contact, but it really makes an impression on me when I notice the kids have grown up with it, because I know that the kids who do it are growing up in the place where I am. Their care providers are professional care providers. They're used to meeting people who they haven't met before and calling them by name and making them feel important. So it makes the greetings in our classroom a little bit easier. They're used to it already when they get here. I think that's all the ones that I wanted to talk to you about for the 3 to 6. A little bit about the second and third planes of development. The sensitive periods for the young adolescent and then the emerging adult are less specific, equally strong, but broader and more general. So whereas the sensitivity for small details or the need for order or practice with movement, those are all strong and brief, relatively brief, a year and a half or so. When you get to adolescence, it's a longer arc and a broader scope. So when kids get to the 6 to 12 elementary age, they get this, others, including Montessori, have called it the herd instinct, the desire to be in groups and to be together. So we have scouts and we have teams, we have musical groups that kids start to participate in, real dedication and joy. That's my sister and her. They're juniors and seniors in high school now, but in that picture they were little, playing soccer together. They also there's the desire to be in a group and to work collaboratively, which we see much less in the primary environment. When they emerge into elementary, they're good co-workers, and small group work is much more successful. The other thing that they develop is this expansive imagination. So the young children are much better at learning if they have an object or a tactile experience, and it's less of a learning circumstance if it's all auditory, if it's words for them to listen to. That changes as they get into the 6 to 12. They're abstract thinkers. They have command of the language, and their imaginations are exploding. So they can think about the universe, they can think about people in other places and how they live, even though they might never have been there themselves. And the other thing that they develop is this sense of morals and justice and fairness. So at the end of their primary, in their 6-year-old year, we start to hear things like, Mrs. Rogers, it isn't fair, or somebody got to do something, why can't I? The younger kids are not so much preoccupied with it because they're very focused on the thing that they're doing. As they get older, justice becomes an issue, and they practice a lot. And then, as you know, that continues on through the elementary years. The third plane, the 12 to 18, is that expansion into citizenship. So all of these skills that they've been in the sensitivities are geared towards the idea of joining the community around you as a contributing member, being socially connected, and having work that is meaningful for you and contributes to the life of your community. That's in the news a lot lately, and it's interesting to me as my sons are my youngest did was first voting, and my older son, it's a preoccupation. They're very concerned that they get themselves registered and vote, and it's much more effortful for them than it is for us because they don't live home. But you know, it's part of their growth, the ending phase of their growth from childhood to adulthood. These are pictures of our adolescent community tending the bees, and they take trips together. So I think that's all that I want to share with you about the particular sensitive period. It's kind of a sweep. But I wanted to also share with you in the time that we have together some kind of observation clues and some parenting teaching strategies so that there's a practical thing that you can actually apply in your life. I don't really think, I think it's important for your knowledge base to know each one of those things. It's not important for you to memorize, because you don't, it's harder for parents at home because children, you have a child or two or maybe three that are growing up in your care, and they pass from one phase to the next. You have a lot of time, but it feels to me like it happens all of a sudden. That's the way it felt to me, like as a parent. So in my life as a teacher, I can get fixed on the sensitive periods of the 3 to 6-year-old. In your life as a parent, it's more to be aware of the sensitive periods as a concept so that you can notice them as they appear. So some observations, things to watch for when you're watching your kids that help with understanding. The first and biggest, and one of the most important, I think, is repetition. Kids or young adults who are fully engaged in something to do with a sensitive period or something to do with their specific area of their growth will repeat tasks. And for our young kids, it's not at all organized in the way it would be for an adult. So most professional adults or high functioning families, adults are working towards efficiency, and they have a goal in mind. So if you're making a meal, you've got steps and a process and a timer, and you have a goal, which is for everybody to sit down at 5. If you're working in your capacity as a professional, same thing. You're trying to be efficient and productive and use the hours that you have available to be as have as much product as you can. Kids, especially young kids, not so much. They're not at all as concerned with efficiency, and they don't care about the product usually. If we're doing our jobs well, they shouldn't be product oriented. So if a very young child is, for example, washing his hands, and it seems like maybe his hands were dirty, they will just keep washing their hands. So I remember early in my career, I worked in an all-day environment, so parents would come at varying times, and we had asked them to wait patiently because if their child was in the middle of a task or finishing something that was important to them, to give them the time to finish so that they could end their day with it for completion. And parents were super cooperative about that. They were grateful to sit and wait and watch their kid at work. But one time I had a mom come. She was not in a huge hurry. She was patient, and she watched her little guy wash his hands at our hand washing station, and he did a beautiful job and cleaned up, and she put her coat on like it's time to go. And he went right back to the sink and filled up the pitcher and started all over again. She just looked at me like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be here forever. Help me, please. That happens all the time in here. We see kids that are just, it's not about clean hands when they're polishing. It's not so much about having the thing that they're polishing be perfectly shiny. If they're scrubbing a table, after the first scrub, they're not really trying to get it clean anymore. It's the process and the joy of repeating and the practice moving left to right. When my godson, who's now also a grown-up, when he was little, we still laugh remembering when he got skilled enough with language that he could say good morning and how are you. He had a period of time where he would walk into our house and we would wait for him, and he would say, hi, how are you? And we would say, hi, Will, how are you? And he would say, fine, thank you. And then he would walk back out the door, wait for a few minutes, and come back in and say, hi, how are you? Over and over again. And he thought it was hilarious and the most fun, but he would say, practice his greetings for 20 or 30 minutes before we could just begin enjoying our time together. So repetition is the big. The other one is errors. So in our classroom, the thing that we work really hard, I work with so many super bright kids, many of whom can anticipate mistakes before they make them. They can see a challenge coming and can think to themselves, golly, I'm about to make a mistake. I'm not sure if I want to do that. So we try really hard to cultivate a friendly attitude towards errors and help them to realize in their teaching, or for me to realize as I'm watching them, that there's nothing really motivating about or inspiring about errors. So when I send the kids for stamp game work at home, I try to tell parents ahead of time, the errors that you see, and you will, is not because I want you to think that I'm not paying attention. It's because they should be evidence to you that your child is learning. No errors, no learning. So when we're at school and the kids are looking like they might hesitate or put the material away because they don't want to make the mistake, we say, this is a mistake-friendly environment. Errors are cool here. Last week, or maybe the week before, one of my oldest kids, one of my 4-year-olds was upset because she was using a material that had a built-in control of error. So the idea behind that is that kids can correct themselves. Actually, it's on the screen, the language cards that you can label. There's a fixed set so that they can look without a teacher's participation. They can tell if they read correctly. But even with that, she didn't want to make mistakes. If the word was too hard for her to read, she wanted somebody else to read it because she didn't want to put it in the wrong place. And I said, don't worry about it. If it's mistakes, you can do it again. You can wait till tomorrow. It's just fine. The material is for practicing. And she kind of, she wasn't cheerful, but she was considering whether she would do that or not. And I said, would you like to have a helper? Somebody who can sit with you and help you read? And she said, yes, she would. And one of my oldest stopped by and she said, I'm available. And as she's walking away, she said, she put her hand in the middle of her younger friend's back to kind of do like a loving adult and walk beside her. And she said, in my family, my parents told me that the best mistakes you make are the ones where you learn. And she was talking to her friend, not to me, but then she looked over her shoulders and she said, Mrs. Rogers, can you tell me, have I been learning today at all? I thought it made me laugh because I said, absolutely, you have been. But she's so absorbed in the things that she's doing, she doesn't even think of them as learning activities. She's just trusting her parents that mistakes are a good thing and they're all part of the process of learning. So in my ear, it was like a bright moment of really good parenting that was not completely understood, but fully implemented in the classroom. in a very loving way at that moment. So repetition errors. The third thing that we notice is a change of pace. So for kids, especially our young kids who are always in a hurry and always moving faster, a little faster than they need to, there's usually a slowing down. So they'll change their posture or their position or the speed at which they're doing whatever they're doing. It's usually a slowing down. Sometimes it looks different, but it's usually a slowing down. Another observational clue would be silence or stillness. And I know that that's kind of a parenting joke. Watch out when it's quiet. That means trouble. It doesn't always mean trouble. Sometimes kids go and hide in a corner at home or in the classroom and it gets quiet and they're up to something. But very often the thing that they're up to is something that's very important to them at that moment in time. And one of the skills I'm continually practicing with myself is to honor the silence and the stillness and to watch and see what's happening. Very often it's a beautiful thing. And very often what they need me to do is honor the silence and watch and not to participate with my voice. Posture is a clue. I you know, when I'm observing in my classroom, I'm not always sitting down, but one of the things I always try to do as I'm watching when I walk is notice changes in posture, because at the very beginning of my career, I noticed that when one particular child who would struggle to read, it was very hard for her, and she was overwhelmed, many times overwhelmed. So I spent a lot of time sitting next to her, just being present for her to feel reassured as she struggled to remember the things that are hard about learning to read. But there was a day when I walked up to do what had the day before been a very good thing, which was support her and just be present for and honor her struggle. And her posture was different. She was not sitting up and restless in her chair. She was a little bit bent over the book that she had. So I paused and watched and I thought, oh, she's reading. And she didn't need me. You know, I could sit and watch and listen and have a private little celebration within myself, because she had moved from being an emerging reader into a person who could read a book by herself. She did eventually look up, and I could give her the smile that says, you know, my gosh, it's the most wonderful thing I've seen today. But my point about the story is that sometimes if we're looking carefully as we move towards our children in home and in school, we notice that they're holding their body differently, the volume changes, the pace changes, something is happening. And it's our choice whether to watch and enjoy or risk an interruption again. Those are the things I wanted to talk about. Those are the observation clues that I use most often. The repetition, the errors, change of pace, the silence, and the posture changes in kids. This wouldn't be a guide for observing in a Montessori classroom. It would be a guide for parenting and teaching when you're watching for the magical moments or trying to honor your kids' concentration as they've learned to. Strategies. So this is my strategies is too strong of a word. I wish there was kind of a more subtle way of thinking of a parenting and teaching. This is one of our staff people's kids. It's like the cutest thing ever. Repeating his practicing brushing his teeth with his mom. And there's the strategies that I wanted to mention to you are unique to Montessori. I think Maria Montessori had lots of areas of genius. I think the thing that I've most appreciated and that keeps me coming back every day is that she had a great depth of understanding, but what she really did better than anybody else is apply her knowledge and understanding of development, human development, to an environment and to the materials that go into that environment. So she was, it's so rare, I think, intelligence is rare, but not super rare. I know a lot of super smart people who are smarter than I am. I don't know very many people who can take their intelligence and apply it in a way that's useful for a community of people. And she was really, really good at that. So that's my one of the things that I hope you take home with you today is that preparing an environment for a child to grow up in is super important it is super important to think about sensitive periods and to use the knowledge that you have of what's important for kids at particular ages and make it clear to your kids in the environment that you understand. So the example that I've already offered is when you know that young children are sensitive to order and routine, it's important when your kids are young to have an environment, at least in the space where they live, where they spend the most time, where things have a place and a sequence, and there's a way for kids to return it to the shelf or the place by themselves. And also, I mean, I say that prescriptively, but I also know that it's much harder at home than it is in school, because you have to change your environment every couple of years. And just when you're settling in and you feel like you've got a beautiful space for your family, something changes. I also would add, though, that many good teachers and administrators in good schools where you live will offer help. So if you feel like your child is transitioning or he's bored by the space that he lives in or she lives in, usually you can ask your teacher, what suggestions would you have for my child is potty training? How would we set up our bathroom so that he can feel a little more successful? Or we're starting to work outside. Would you have any suggestions for our outside door space so that our child can participate with us in the garden that we enjoy? Most teachers really enjoy that because it gives them an opportunity to contribute into their child's life and home in a way that complements school. Some will even come to your home. Many of the parents I work with don't need that at all. They've got it figured out, and they're geniuses, better than I was at shopping and design and adjustments. But sometimes people like help. So prepare your environment. The other thing is, well, before I leave that topic, I have to say, as kids to get into second or third plane, that's harder, super hard, because their environment is not the space that you live in, but it expands out. So especially when kids begin to drive, but even earlier when they're going in their elementary and they're going out with somebody else, and they're going places where you are not and meeting people who you may or may not know, that takes a lot of parental courage. And but it's very important because that's where their intellect is leading them. It's important for them to have the opportunity to practice their grace and courtesy skills with people they don't actually know, and to go to places they've never been before and practice moving in spaces that are larger and less familiar. Navigating is part of their growth in movement. So the other add I would add to the parent teaching is to give your time and attention with your eyes and with your ears, and as infrequently as possible with your voice. I think many of us make the mistake, I know I do, of feeling like when you talk to your child that that's evidence to them that you're paying attention. Sometimes that's what's needed. If kids ask a question, or if they ask you to comment or notice their work, or say, look at me, or talk to me, or tell me what to do, or help me. But very often they want to work within the silence they've created, and for your participation to be an observation or a listening. And sometimes our voices are just an interruption. It breaks the flow of their concentration. Even strangely enough, even in an environment like ours, where there's ambient noise and movement all day long, if a child is absorbed and concentrating, my voice is an interruption because they blocked everything around them. They're not hearing any of the noise, like it's like a noise machine that people use to fall asleep. They don't hear it at all, but my voice they will hear, and it will pull them away from the things they're doing. And also, so giving your attention with your eyes and your ears, but one of the things I think that we need to do often at home and also in school for sure is to guard the periphery. So when you see a child of any age, an adolescent, it's more of a technological guarding of the periphery, making sure that their distractions are not more than they can manage. And in a home environment with siblings, the sibling is often the distraction, and our work is to protect their space. So kids who are growing up in Montessori know that they have the privilege of choosing work, repeating it as often as they want, and that it's not available for other people until they put it back in the space. And our job is to make sure that that happens, that nobody will come and interrupt them or take something away or bump their table or make their sacred time and space anything less than it could have otherwise been. When that comes up at home, it's much more difficult because the sibling relationships are usually pretty challenging, but I also think it's pretty important. Not every day, all day, and not for every little thing, but if a child is engaged in, say, washing the dishes or helping you to make a meal or helping you to make cookies or something, and they want to complete the task, they should get to complete the task before they have interruptions from other people. The other thing I would add about the details or the nuances of interruption other than voice is that it's really hard for parents when you can notice that kids have made a mistake, or you see that they spelled something wrong, or that they didn't tie their shoes the right way, or that when they clean something up, it's maybe not as clean as you would like it to be, or they folded something in a way that's not going to fit in the place you have in mind. The thing that interrupts is the correction. So in my classroom, most, and not just mine, but most really solid teachers will make a note, either in writing or in my mind, of an error that's repeating or something that needs correction. Let you stick it in the back of your mind and introduce it as a concept later, so that, again, so you don't interrupt the flow. Kids shouldn't have the delight of saying, look what I did, or will you read what I wrote? Can you read what I wrote? It's no fun to say, well, can we first correct your spelling? Or I know what you mean, but you have your words in the wrong place. If I in teaching reading, I should be able to read what they wrote, and I make an effort to do that. If I muddle, or if I make a mistake, they'll gladly correct me, and that's fine, but I don't feel like it's a moment for me. If my goal is to keep them excited and engaged and joyful in their learning, and if my other goal is for them to come with me to share, then the correction needs to wait. The correction is an interruption, and doesn't contribute a thing to their joy. So preparing the environment, giving the attention, avoiding interruption, allowing the errors that come up, and creating the time and the space for self-creation. So in school, again, this is easier at school because we have 3-hour blocks of time that are uninterrupted. At home, you have busy lives. You've got things that you've got to do in the time you have at home before your day begins again. But it's such a gift to your kids if you can create uninterrupted time where nobody's talking on the phone, the television's off. Kids have the permission to do the things that are available to them, and you're participating in the ways that they like, within reason. You know, the life of your family can't revolve around the needs of one child at a particular moment in time, because there's multiple conflicting needs going on. But some attention to that is super helpful. I was remembering as I was preparing for this that about 4 or 5 years ago, there's a marsh near where I live and teach, and I walk my dogs there. And for many months, I saw a mom walking with her 3 sons. Occasionally, we didn't run into each other. I didn't know her, but she looked like she had all the time in the world. And her little guy, who was like walking, but maybe 18 months or something like that, was, climbing over trees and crawling around and just doing what toddlers do, staring at bugs and stuff. And I thought to myself, golly, I wish I could. It would be so fun to have that kid in my class, because he's had such a privileged childhood, like he's getting out into the world and just gets freedom to roam. And the stars were in alignment because they showed up. And he was in my class. He's graduated now. But so interesting to me that I operated on the assumption that she had more time than the rest of us to be wandering around the marsh with her 3 sons and acting like she had nothing to do. She was actually a high school chemistry AP teacher, had a lot to do every day, and her older sons were involved in other things. But even with that full schedule, she created time to wander around the marsh a couple of times a week. And her kid was a joy. I enjoyed him very much. That's it, I think, for my conclusions and strategies. I hope those are useful for you in your life at home. So my concluding thoughts for you are good news, I think, because even though I operate in the assumption that I've missed a lot every day, things happen that I don't see, that I don't hear, and that's by design. Montessori created full environments full of life and activity, and kids doing things with each other that are not teacher dependent. And sometimes I make errors of interruption. Sometimes I say things when my words were not necessary. Sometimes I break a child's concentration just with my body. Healthy kids will insist. They'll come back repeatedly every time a day, every time, every day. Even when I don't have the clarity or the time or the inner peace to pay attention at the right moment in the right way, they'll keep doing the right thing in the right way when I notice and when I don't. So I hope that's a relief to you, because nothing about this presentation should be like the things that will happen when you don't do the right thing. It's an opportunity. Knowing about sensitive periods and the way they present is an opportunity for you to participate and to watch the life of your child as he or she grows. But it's really hard to make catastrophic mistakes in this area. what would happen is that you would miss things or interrupt things that might have gone on more longer. The other good news is, especially for those of you who have your kids in Montessori classrooms, is that they get all of these gifts and these opportunities every day you drop them off at school. So an uninterrupted work cycle is bedrock in Montessori classrooms. It's something that teachers talk about all the time and try to adjust so that as the kids and the community grow and their lengthen and strengthen their ability to concentrate, the community grows with them. So that when you pick them up at the end of the day, even if you have 5 errands to run before supper and 2 other children that you have to get to their extracurricular activities, your child has had several opportunities during their time in school to concentrate deeply and without interruption, and at their own pace. And they also get in our classroom the freedom to pick the thing that calls to them. Healthy kids will be drawn towards the things that are good for them, not without exception. Curiosity is fickle. Sometimes kids will be interested in something they're not quite ready for. But after a little bit of experience in a well-established Montessori classroom, kids understand and they're attracted to things that will enhance their development. And they get to do that all day long in Montessori classrooms. We offer some limits, but as I was describing earlier, the order in the classroom, the limits are present in the environment. It doesn't really require a lot of teacher reinforcement. And the other thing about that, or the other affirmation I wanted to offer you is that my experience as a teacher who still loves her work and finds joy every day, and as a mom, is that you never really run out of opportunities to delight and to see something that you hadn't noticed the day before. The kids are so, even on days when I feel like I wasn't at all the kind of teacher or mom that I wanted to be, and I watch the kids walk out the door and I wonder, are they happy to see me at all tomorrow? They always are. They are so resilient and so reliably show up with new joy for a new day and a healthy attraction to the things that are good for them. I think that is the great gift that raising children offers us, is that their presence at a moment in time reminds us that we too can be present in a moment in time and, share in their experience, or at least observe it and delight that they are able to grow in the ways that they are. Strong kids, strong environment. I think that's all that I wanted to share with you. I thank you for attending. I talked a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I'm open to questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We have one question here in the chat. I'll read it out. How long should I approach my child when he gets upset about something out of their order or sequence? For example, every time we go out for our evening walk to the park and enjoy nature, we take a certain route. Sometimes we take different routes. In the next moment, we'll take a different route. My 4-year-old child gets completely upset and loses it, cries, screams, totally angry. I sometimes do not know what the best way to respond is. How is it best to approach a situation when it is out of the child's sequence, order, rhythm, or routine?
Yeah, so I'm sure that there's more than one way to answer it. I know there's more than one way to answer any question you're having to do. I'll tell you what I would do. I would go the same way every time you went to the park. So at school, when we have picture day, which is a small interruption in our day, it's just one time of the year when we go upstairs and we take pictures. The whole day is a twirl. The kids can't figure out, will they have lunch at school? Should they change their shoes? What about my coat? I don't have my lunchbox. Should I have my lunch? Just stuff that is not at all related to picture day. They're so routine dependent and so dependent on the structure and the familiarity. They can't tell time. They can't really, do directions independently yet. They're just relying on landmarks. And when they don't have the landmarks, it's huge. It rocks their world. So I don't, you could say something like, tell your child ahead of time that you'll be taking a different path. And you could do that. I've tried that a lot of times. It's not really very successful. They agree with you as an idea and as a conversation point, they understand. So on picture day, I tell the children, we're going to get our pictures taken today. And I know that it's somebody that you don't know, and it feels funny to go upstairs in the middle of the morning. Everything else will be the same. Nothing will be different. Mommies and daddies will come at the same time. The kids who eat lunch will eat lunch. Still, It's the whole day, every day, they have to ask questions and have me remind them what's going to happen next. And when we come back, is it time to come home? It's very, very confusing. We just forget because good parents and have built our routines to respond to the needs of kids. And so it looks like they're cool. And then you break out of the routine and it's not so. Or the other thing that comes up quite a bit with some difference, some kids are a little bit more flexible, but if you've ever tried to put a very young child to bed outside of, or to sleep outside of your home environment or out of the routine without your usual nighttime rituals, it's a disaster most of the time. You can't convince a child that they're tired and they should go to bed or that their bedtime was 30 minutes ago. They have no idea what you're talking about. They're not telling time. They're wanting to have the routine to remind them how things go before they go to sleep. That's an unsatisfying answer, but it's one of the things I think that's hard about this topic is that it requires of us an adjustment in what would be absolutely ordinary expectation for young adults or adults, but little kids just can't do it.
Any other questions for Jennifer before we wrap up? I'll take a short pause.
Oh, wait, I think I have a slide. Isn't that a beautiful picture? That's one of I included that because that's one of my students who's well into elementary now, but she had for a long time had a little stuffy that she carried around. And her mom sent me that picture when she was away with her extended family and kind of at that threshold from primary to elementary and starting to let go of some of the things that had offered her comfort. Her mom is obviously a talented photographer. I mean,
All right. I'm going to drop the link here again. This is just a link that you used for our registration page. The recording for this will be posted there tomorrow. So if you joined us a little bit later and you missed parts, you can always reference it. Thank you so much for all of the parents who have joined us for the entire series or have been watching the recordings. We hope it's been helpful for you. And thank you so much for presenting and sharing your experiences, your stories, and your wisdom with us, Jennifer. I think this was a really helpful presentation. You're getting lots of thank yous here in the chat. So we really appreciate your time.
thank you for showing up. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the series and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.